You need to leave. This lounge is for real clients. Karen Miller didn't even blink when she said it. Her voice cut through the quiet like a slap across the face. At 10:17 a.m. on a humid Miami morning, inside the marble-lined private client lounge of Summit Wealth Bank, those 8 words fell like a gavel. And they hit Isabella Rossi hard, not because she believed them, but because she had expected them. Before we dive deeper, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who didn't know you owned the building they worked in? If this story strikes a chord, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because in 10 minutes, everything you think you know about power bias and banking is going to shift right here in this very lounge. Isabella Rossi, 46 years old, walked into the branch in dark wash jeans, a pale blue cashmere sweater, and simple black loafers. She didn't look like the CEO of Summit Enterprises, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that had acquired Summit Wealth Bank just 2 years earlier. That was intentional. This morning was a test. She had no entourage, no handbag with a designer logo, no flashy jewelry. She carried a slim tablet case and wore a quiet confidence. She approached the front desk and requested access to the private lounge to complete a $5,000 withdrawal. The teller directed her to the glass-partitioned room without asking a single question. But the moment she sat down, that calm shattered. Karen Miller. The branch manager strode over like she smelled smoke and was searching for the fire. Her blonde bob swayed as she leaned over the mahogany desk. "We'll need proof of where your funds came from," she said. Her tone was flat, but her eyes were cold. Isabella didn't flinch. She'd seen this before. It was the same look she got at 23, when her account was frozen for unusual activity after depositing her first real estate commission. The same look she saw at 26, when a loan officer called her high risk, even though she'd brought in 30% more collateral than required. And now, 2 decades and $8 billion later, here it was again. Isabella calmly opened her tablet, queued up a document, and slid it across the table before Karen could glance at it. A voice interrupted, "Don't clog up the line, sweetheart." Chadwick Vance, 45, a white investment banker in an expensive gray suit, sneered as he walked past. With one flick of his wrist, he knocked Isabella's tablet off the desk. It hit the ground with a soft thud but a loud insult. Isabella stared at him, calm, composed. Chadwick didn't even look back. Brittany Foster, 29. A private banker stood at the far corner, arms crossed. "That amount of cash doesn't add up. You could have stolen it." Her words weren't loud, but they carried. 2 clients looked up. One raised an eyebrow. Another whispered to his companion. Isabella blinked slowly. Then she said, cool and measured, "Run my name." Karen shook her head. "You're not verified. This isn't a walk-in center." In the back corner, Leo Zhang, a 31-year-old tech entrepreneur, began filming with his phone. The red light glowed, casting a quiet spotlight on the room's unraveling dignity. "Don't," Isabella said firmly, her voice still calm. "We settle this with facts, not footage." A tall black man in a gray suit, Marcus James 40, rose from his chair and walked over to Leo. "Brother," he said softly, "put that down. This is bigger than one clip. It's about how we speak up, not how we go viral." Leo hesitated. Isabella met his eyes. "Words," she said. "Use your words." The room stilled for a moment. Chloe Davis, 28, sat silently to Isabella's left hands, clutching her purse lips pressed in fury. She finally whispered, "This is foul." Isabella turned her head. "Speak up," she said. "Let them hear it." Chloe stood. "She's not the problem, you are," she said, pointing at Karen and Brittany. Brittany raised a brow, unamused. "Security's on standby," she muttered. Chadwick, now leaning against a nearby pillar, smirked. "You all really think this woman has $500,000 sitting in an account here?" he said, half laughing. "Pawn shop's down the street." He slipped a folded note across the marble floor. It skidded to a stop at Isabella's foot. Chloe bent down, picked it up, and read it out loud. "Go to a pawn shop." A collective gasp followed. One elderly white woman clutched her handbag tighter. A young Latino father with a toddler looked up from his phone. The room was no longer quiet. It was humming. "That's enough," Isabella said, voice rising, but still composed. "You're destroying this institution with every word that comes out of your mouth." Karen smirked, clearly enjoying the power trip. "You're not a client, you're a con artist. Go play rich somewhere else." Isabella took a breath, pulled out her phone and dialed. "Anita," she said, "start Protocol 6. On the other end, Anita Sharma, her executive assistant, didn't miss a beat. "It's ready, ma'am." "You're going to regret this," Isabella said. "Not because I'll scream, not because I'll post a video, but because you just told the wrong woman she doesn't belong in the bank she owns." Karen scoffed. "Delusions don't scare me." Leo raised his phone again. Marcus stepped forward. "We do this the right way. No videos, no edits. We talk." Chadwick rolled his eyes. "Security now." Karen nodded at Brittany, who pulled out a landline receiver. "Calling now," she said. "She's a fraud." Isabella didn't move, didn't flinch. She held her ground with the same stillness that once steadied her when her first property sale nearly collapsed due to a forged title. The same stillness that had guided her through 14 acquisitions and a global recession. But now it wasn't just her name or assets being challenged. It was her existence in this space, this lounge, this institution. So before we go deeper into this story, I want to ask, if you were told to leave a place you owned, would you? Or would you do what Isabella did? Sit down, stay silent, and let the storm come to you, because the storm had already begun. "She's a fraud, Stephen. Throw her out." Karen Miller didn't whisper. She barked it loud enough for the entire private client lounge to hear, as if volume could drown out guilt. Assistant Manager Stephen Webb, 48, stepped forward reluctantly. His hands were stiff at his sides. "This woman," Karen continued, her voice rising with every syllable, "is a con artist parading around like she owns the place." Isabella Rossi turned her head, slowly, unblinking. She didn't say a word yet. The marble floors, the frosted glass, the recessed lighting, none of it softened the air, now thick with tension. The lounge no longer felt private. It felt like a courtroom. Chadwick Vance added fuel, standing tall in his suit, jaw set. "She stole that money and now she's here wasting everyone's time. Why hasn't she been arrested yet?" That word stole hit like shrapnel. Two clients near the espresso bar looked at each other, whispering. One raised a phone slightly but thought better of it. Brittany Foster, still leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, narrowed her eyes and said with confidence, "That's stolen cash. No real client makes that kind of request, not dressed like that." Isabella, still seated, took in the comment. Her outfit faded jeans clean, but simple loafers, a soft cashmere sweater. It wasn't the armor these people expected from a millionaire, but it was intentional. It was human. It was deliberate. Chloe Davis stood up from her chair, voice shaking but clear. "Enough. You're all out of line. You don't even know her." Chadwick laughed. "We know the type. She probably got someone's login and thinks she can just walk in here and drain $500,000 like it's her birthday." Stephen shifted again, clearly uneasy. His lips parted like he wanted to say something. He didn't. Leo Jiang, still holding his phone just low enough to seem subtle, looked to Isabella. I should be recording this. Isabella shook her head. Words, not lenses. Marcus James stood beside her, stepping closer to Leo. Let your voice work, not your camera. If we want to change the room, we speak in it, not post about it after. Leo hesitated. You're right, but this doesn't feel real. Chloe looked around. It is. This is how they treat us. Brittany took a sharp breath. You're making a scene. Isabella's voice cut through everything like a thread of steel. You called security on me for existing. That's the only scene here. Stephen finally spoke, voice low, eyes to the floor. Do you have any account verification? The words stumbled out like they were dragging shame behind them. Isabella didn't look at him. She dialed Anita Sharma. Anita, they've escalated it. Proceed to Phase 2 of Protocol 6. Anita's voice came through steady, efficient. Confirmed. I've logged the escalation and noted the language used. Also, Karen's call to security is time-stamped. Internal audit will hear this. Isabella replied, They'll hear everything, every word. Stephen straightened up slightly, caught between two worlds, his loyalty to Karen and the truth unraveling around him. Karen waved him off. Don't entertain this. She's just here to make a mess. Chadwick chimed in again. She's probably filming some social stunt trying to play victim for views. Leo stepped forward now, forgetting the camera. She's not filming, I was. But I stopped because she asked us to speak, not post. Maybe try listening for once. Brittany's voice cracked slightly. Security's coming. Let them deal with this. Chloe didn't sit. Security for what? A withdrawal. Karen raised her voice again. You're all being manipulated. You think someone like her walks in off the street and has access to $500,000? Wake up. Isabella turned to face her fully now. You sound afraid. That's the sound of your job slipping away. Karen hissed. Threats. That's what you're going with now. Isabella didn't blink. No, just a mirror. Anita's voice returned over the phone. Isabella, I've elevated the incident to our corporate ethics board. They're monitoring live, and we've logged every biased phrase spoken within the last 3 minutes. I've also linked the 2023 Summit acquisition documents to your profile file for real-time confirmation. Isabella nodded once. Keep the line open. Karen scoffed. Corporate's not going to save your little con job. Stephen turned slowly, his voice hollow. Karen, what if she's right? Karen stared at him like he'd just betrayed her family. Don't be naive. But the cracks were showing. Isabella stood up now, steady and calm. You asked for proof of funds. You accused me of fraud. You called me a thief. You triggered a security call. You mocked the way I dressed, and you humiliated me in a room full of witnesses. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. And I'm still standing here. Why do you think that is? The silence in the room was immediate. Even Chadwick folded his arms tighter, lips pressed. Chloe walked to Isabella's side. What now? Isabella said. We wait. The truth is coming whether they want it or not. Karen folded her arms tighter. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Chadwick barked. If she had money, she'd show it. You people always act entitled until someone asks for numbers. Marcus turned sharply. You people, the words echoed. Stephen sat down in one of the lounge chairs. This isn't how we should treat people. Brittany rolled her eyes. It's called protocol. Isabella spoke to Anita again. Have you started Phase 3? Anita replied. Already underway. Karen's compliance reports are being pulled. And just for the Note 8 of her prior service complaints involved women of color, all filed under unverified and never escalated. It's not a good look. Isabella closed her eyes briefly, absorbing that. She had known, but hearing it laid out so clearly still hit differently. Thank you, Anita. Don't stop. Chloe's voice cracked. They're trying to erase us with policy, with tone, with fake concern for security. Isabella placed a hand on her shoulder. Not today. Karen smirked. You think your little phone call and a few tech buzzwords are going to change anything? Isabella's gaze sharpened. No, but I'm not here to change everything. I'm here to end this branch's legacy of silence. Leo murmured. Damn. Marcus nodded slowly. And this is why we don't record. Because when people speak the truth like this, it doesn't need a filter. Suddenly, Brittany stepped toward Isabella and picked up the fallen tablet from earlier. She held it in both hands, looked down at it. Then, without a word, she tossed it to the side, where it skidded across the floor and hit the base of a leather chair. Stolen junk, she muttered. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Was that yours to destroy, or just your impulse to control? Brittany turned her back. Stephen watched her walk away and shook his head. She's gone too far. And in that moment, Isabella spoke again. Every second you spend talking instead of reflecting is a second closer to the end of your employment. Karen's smile faded. You think you're some kind of hero. Isabella's tone sharpened. No, I'm your reckoning. Call the police. She's a financial threat. Brittany Foster didn't hesitate. She picked up the landline receiver and dialed fast, her voice loud enough for the whole lounge to hear as she said, Yes, we have a woman here attempting to withdraw funds under false pretenses. High amount possibly stolen. She didn't stutter. She sounded practiced, like this wasn't her first time. Isabella Rossi sat motionless in the center of the client lounge. Her hands folded over her tablet, eyes locked forward, voice quiet but sharp. You just made a federal false report. I hope you're ready to explain it in court. Karen Miller scoffed, arms folded as she leaned beside the espresso machine. Sweetheart, that's not how this works. We protect the institution, not the imposters. Her words were laced with contempt, not caution. Then she turned to Stephen Webb, the assistant manager. Get her out, now. Stephen didn't move. His eyes flicked toward Isabella, then to Brittany, then back to Karen. She hasn't even raised her voice, he muttered. That's what scares you, isn't it? Chadwick Vance stepped forward, shoving his hands in his pockets, trying to fill the room with his presence. She's laundering money that's obvious. What else do you need? He waved a platinum-colored business card in the air like it meant something. And I'm supposed to be in the vault consultation. I'm a priority client. His voice was harsh, his tone theatrical. This woman is nothing. This is all theater. Karen suddenly stepped behind Isabella's chair and demanded, Show me your financial history, right now. If you're legit, prove it. Open your account in front of everyone. The tone wasn't procedural. It was taunting. Isabella didn't move. She lifted her head slowly, then looked to the entryway as footsteps echoed in. The security lead, Derek Hayes, 34, had arrived. He wore a Navy uniform with a Summit Wealth badge stitched tight above his heart. What's going on here? He asked. Brittany pointed directly at Isabella. She's a suspected fraud. We've requested verification, she's refused, and now she's escalating the situation with her phone. Derek nodded and walked over, then stood directly in front of Isabella's seat. I need your bag and your tablet. He didn't ask. He reached. When Isabella didn't immediately move, Derek shoved her purse off the adjacent seat and onto the floor. You're being detained for non-compliance. Marcus James, still standing near the center of the room, stepped forward. That is not legal. She hasn't broken a single law. Chloe Davis grabbed her phone but didn't record. She simply gripped it, trembling. This is what happens, she whispered, even when you sit quietly. Isabella's eyes locked on Derek's face. Touch me again, and I will personally make sure Summit Wealth pays for it. Derek raised an eyebrow, amused. Lady, I don't care what you threaten. You don't belong here. Those 5 words sliced deeper than anything else. You don't belong here. Marcus moved to stand between them. Step back, man. Derek held firm. You interfering now? I'm protecting a client, Marcus said, holding his ground. Liu Zhang stood from the corner, holding his phone higher now. This needs to be seen. Isabella's voice cracked not from fear, but fury. Leo, don't. We don't need their eyes. We need their ears. Leo lowered his phone, swallowing hard. Then say it louder. Isabella turned to Karen and spoke slowly. You demand my history, like I owe you my identity, but I don't owe this room anything. I've earned more than anyone in here, including you. So instead of asking where my money came from, maybe ask why you think you have the right to question it. At that moment, Anita Sharma's voice came through the phone in Isabella's hand, steady and deliberate. Isabella Protocol 6 is now fully active. Summit's compliance board has flagged Karen's employee record. They're pulling the 2023 audit logs. I've also linked Chadwick's prior formal warning for verbal misconduct. One more incident, and corporate will suspend his client privileges. Isabella didn't smile. She just nodded. Let it all run. Karen leaned forward, almost growling. You won't get away with this. Isabella replied, You mean being black, wealthy, and patient? I've done it for 20 years. Stephen backed away from the cluster forming near Isabella's seat, mumbling, This is not what I signed up for. Brittany gripped the phone tighter as she continued speaking with dispatch, giving her name, clearly spelling out possible financial criminal present, with no irony. Clients around the lounge began to murmur louder. An elderly man near the window stood and shook his head. This is ridiculous, he said. A young black couple nearby took each other's hands. Then came the crack. Stephen's voice low but clear. I need to say something. All eyes turned. Karen. Brittany. What we're doing is wrong. Karen's eyes went wide. Don't you dare! Stephen looked at the floor. Brittany wanted the police here. She didn't even run the verification. She refused to check the back end. She said bringing them in would shut her down fast. Brittany gasped. You liar! Stephen nodded once. I was there. You said it. And you said it knowing who she might be. Chadwick shouted, You're turning on your team for her. She's bluffing. Isabella stood slowly, then called the bluff. She lifted her voice, finally powerfully. I am Isabella Rossi, CEO of Summit Enterprises, owner of Summit Wealth Bank, and every second you've spent humiliating me in this room, it's been recorded, logged, and now witnessed. Clients around the lounge stared, frozen. Karen's face lost its color. Stephen didn't move. Brittany backed toward the wall. Derek blinked like he'd seen a ghost. Then it hit. The twist wasn't the reveal. It was the response. Clients started clapping slowly, then all at once. Marcus stepped forward. I knew I'd seen you before. Forbes. 2 years ago. Your company turned this bank around. Chloe stood, tears in her eyes. She's our CEO. Leo whispered, I should have filmed this part. Isabella looked around the room, her voice no longer calm, now commanding. The problem wasn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is how you treated someone you thought didn't matter. Karen stammered. You set us up, Isabella answered. No, I tested you, and you failed. The entire room shifted, and from the corner of the lounge the sound of sirens grew faint in the distance. Police were coming. But the real justice, it had already walked through the front door. Detain her now before she disappears. Karen Miller's voice cracked with desperation as she pointed at Isabella, eyes wild, posture no longer composed, but combative. The tension in the private client lounge snapped. Derek Hayes, the security lead, stepped forward without hesitation, reaching for Isabella's arm, as if dragging her away would undo the last 5 minutes of truth. But Isabella didn't move. She stood as if anchored to the floor itself. "Touch me, and you'll lose more than your job," she said. Not loud, but firm, steady, and absolute. Chloe Davis stepped in between them before Derek's fingers could close. "Back up," she shouted. "You heard what she just said. She owns this place." Derek hesitated. He glanced at Karen, then back at Isabella. The growing uncertainty in his stance exposed the cracks beneath the uniform. At that moment, the double doors to the lounge pushed open, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Their boots echoed over the polished floor. A hush swept over the room. One officer, a white man in his 40s, with a worn expression, raised a brow as his gaze met Isabella's. "We got a report of a fraud attempt. Can someone tell us what's going on?" Brittany Foster stepped forward immediately, posture squared, like she was proud of what she'd done. "She's impersonating a high-net-worth client. She demanded $500,000 in cash with no verification." Her voice was sharp. "This could be a federal-level theft." Isabella didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply turned toward the officer and said, "I'd like to make a statement, but not yet." Before the officer could respond, the sound of a soft, cracking voice broke through the silence. "They're lying." Every head turned. It was Nia Jackson, a 24-year-old black woman in a denim jacket, seated quietly near the frosted glass divider. She'd been silent until now, small in posture, unnoticed. "They did it to me too, 2 weeks ago," she said, standing slowly. "I came in to open a photography business account. Brittany refused to run my EIN. She said we don't open accounts for freelancers with inconsistent histories." Brittany spun toward her. "That's not true." Nia raised her phone. "I recorded it, didn't post it. But it's time someone did." Gasps echoed through the room. Derek took a single step back. One of the police officers turned to Brittany and asked, "Ma'am, did you make that call knowing she owns this bank?" Brittany's face lost its color. She didn't own it at the time," she stammered. Isabella turned slowly. "I've owned it for nearly 2 years, which means what you just said is either a lie or a confession." Liu Zhang lifted his phone again, but this time he didn't hit record. He just whispered, "She didn't have to shout. She didn't need a camera. She is the camera now." Marcus James looked to the officers and said, "Gentlemen, I think you're witnessing the end of a system, one that protected people like Brittany, Karen, and Chadwick, and I think you know it too." The officer who had spoken earlier nodded slowly but noticeably. "We're not making any arrests, but we'll be writing a report, a full one." Anita Sharma's voice came through on Isabella's phone, calm and timely. "Isabella Corporate has received the Nia Jackson complaint. It was buried. Brittany flagged it as ineligible for review. That violates Compliance Policy 4.3. Isabella nodded. "And Karen's role," Anita answered. "She signed off on the rejection." Isabella turned to Karen, whose defiance was giving way to panic. "You told me to leave. You refused my ID. You called me a con artist. And now you want to hide behind Brittany's bad paperwork." Karen's hands trembled. "You dressed like you didn't belong here. I made a judgment call." Isabella stepped forward. "That wasn't judgment. That was bias. Chadwick Vance, still lingering at the edge of the crowd, scoffed. "We're all being dramatic. I'm leaving. I've got better things to do." Chloe Davis shouted, "No, you don't. You were part of this," Chadwick snapped. "You people are always so loud." And just like that, the room boiled over. "You people," Leo said. "You mean the woman who owns the bank?" Marcus stepped between Chadwick and the rest. "Leave now, man. That card you wave around won't protect you from what just happened." Chadwick turned toward the door, but not before one of the officers said, "Sir, we'll need your statement before you go." He paused, then slowly sat down defeated. Isabella turned back to the police. "I'd like to de-escalate this in-house. No arrests, not yet. I want people to speak. I want the room to understand what just happened here." One officer nodded. "You sure about that?" "Completely," Isabella said. She turned to Nia. "You're brave. You should never have had to be." Nia replied, "I just wanted to open an account, that's all." Isabella placed her hand over her heart. "And from today forward, you'll never be treated like that again. In fact, your account will be opened personally by the executive board fee-free. You've earned that much." Marcus turned to Isabella, voice warm. "You didn't just stop a system. You exposed it." Isabella looked at him, her voice low. "And now I'm going to dismantle it." Behind her, Karen muttered to herself, eyes lost. This was never supposed to happen. Stephen stood beside her, quiet, but not defensive. It was always going to happen. We just didn't think we'd get caught. Derek took a single step toward the exit. Isabella raised a hand. "Stay. You'll need to hear what comes next. Because your name's on the file too." Chloe whispered to Leo. "She's not just firing them. She's rewriting the rules." Anita's voice came back through the phone. "Summit compliance officers are arriving within 10 minutes. They've requested Isabella lead the internal debrief, and they've approved full authority to act." Isabella smiled faintly. "Good. Because I've been ready for this day longer than they know." And with the lounge watching clients, staff officers, and a young woman named Nia, the future of Summit Wealth was no longer a question of policy. It was a matter of personal reckoning. "Enough." Isabella Rossi's voice didn't rise, but it silenced the entire room. The client lounge, once humming with tension and scattered disbelief, now stood still. Every client, every officer, every staff member held their breath. She stepped forward, no longer seated, no longer patient. She wore no badge, no visible sign of title or ownership, yet her presence now filled the entire space like the weight of a verdict. "For 10 minutes, I've endured slurs, suspicion, and slander inside a building that bears my company's name. So allow me to remove all doubt." She reached into her tablet case and pulled out a small black folder embossed with the gold Summit Wealth Bank logo. She opened it carefully and turned it toward the nearest officer, and then to the room. Inside a corporate ID, a notarized certificate, and a letter of authority signed by the board of directors. "My name is Isabella Rossi. I am the founder and CEO of Summit Enterprises. I own 81% of Summit Wealth Bank. And starting today, I will no longer tolerate misconduct under this roof." The reaction was instant. Karen's jaw dropped. Stephen took a step backward, face ashen. Brittany staggered into a chair. Derek's hands fell from his belt. Even Chadwick Vance, seated and stewing, leaned forward in stunned silence. Anita's voice crackled through the phone, still connected. "Isabella has full termination authority, as listed under Summit Compliance Directive 4B. This conversation is being logged for HR verification. You may proceed, ma'am." Isabella didn't smile. She simply turned and faced the staff directly. Karen Miller, you're fired effective immediately for racial bias abuse of position and obstruction of client services. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her voice had carried so easily 10 minutes earlier. Now it trembled in retreat. Stephen Webb, you're fired not just for complicity, but for standing silent while a client was profiled, accused, and humiliated. Stephen didn't argue. He simply lowered his head. Brittany Foster, Isabella continued, you're terminated for knowingly fabricating a client risk report, triggering a false police call, and burying bias complaints. You broke the system from the inside. Brittany let out a sharp breath, her composure breaking. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you. Isabella didn't flinch. And if it had been someone else? Brittany's lips parted. She stopped. There was no defense. Derek Hayes, Isabella said, turning. You're dismissed for aggression, unlawful detainment attempt, and failure to de-escalate. Derek stood tall, but didn't respond. He just turned and walked to the far end of the lounge, like a man waiting for a bus to take him off a cliff. And Chadwick Vance, Isabella said, voice colder now. You're banned from all Summit-affiliated institutions effective immediately for harassment, racism, and documented misconduct. Chadwick jumped up. You can't ban me. I'm worth more to this bank than half the people in here, Chloe shouted from the side. Not today, you're not. Isabella raised her hand calmly. We don't build institutions to serve the loudest ego. We build them to protect the quiet dignity of the people who walk in expecting fairness. The room erupted in applause, not the kind that's performative or polite, but the kind that carries years of pent-up injustice in its rhythm. Marcus James stood with a quiet nod. That, he said, was justice in real time. Nia Jackson, still standing off to the side, had tears in her eyes. I thought I'd never be seen. Not really. Isabella looked at her, her voice softening. You weren't just seen today. You were believed. Just as the officers began to exit, Brittany suddenly spoke. Her voice cracked, small and raw. Wait. The room quieted again. I need to say something. Isabella turned, her expression unchanged. Speak. Brittany took a breath so deep it shook her shoulders. I buried 8 complaints in the last year. All of them came from women of color. I flagged them as duplicates, unverifiable, or outside policy windows. I did it to keep our numbers clean. Stephen knew. I told him. He told me to do what I had to. A gasp rippled through the lounge. Stephen didn't look up. Isabella turned to Anita. Can you confirm that? Anita's voice returned without hesitation. Confirmed. We've located those complaint records and audio files. Brittany's voice is on 2 of them. Stephen's signature is on 4. Brittany sat down, shaking. I didn't know how to stop. I thought, if I didn't follow, I'd be next. Isabella approached slowly, her tone measured. You weren't a follower. You were the one holding the torch while others burned. But today, I'm putting that fire out. Brittany didn't respond. She wept quietly into her hands. Isabella turned back to the rest of the room. For those still standing in this lounge, staff, clients, officers, and guests, I want you to understand something. Ownership isn't just a legal document or a title. It's a responsibility. And my responsibility is to make sure this never happens again. Not here. Not on my watch. Anita's voice followed, once more steady. Corporate has initiated full disciplinary review and operational audit for the branch. Isabella, the floor is yours to lead reform. Isabella looked around the room at Marcus, Chloe, Nia, Leo, the clients who had rallied the strangers, who had stayed silent but now looked changed. Then let's begin. Because this bank no longer answers to people like Karen. It answers to the people it was built to serve. And with those words, the door to reform didn't just open. It stayed open wide enough for the future to walk through with dignity. Isabella didn't wait for the applause to fade. The moment the firings were done, and Brittany's confession still echoed in the air, she turned to the stunned room and said, "This isn't just about what they did. It's about what we're going to do now." She walked to the center of the private lounge, standing beside a cream leather chair that had once symbolized prestige, but today was just a seat among many. "Effective immediately, all branch operations are paused," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "No new transactions, no account actions, no client meetings until we reset what this institution stands for." The clients didn't groan, they nodded. Some even clapped. "We are launching the Summit Equity Program today, not next quarter. And we're doing it right here in this room. This branch will be the first test site for verbal audits, active diversity accountability, and a face-to-face values pledge for every single staff member who wants to stay employed." Anita's voice came through on speaker, now projected from Isabella's tablet. "I've drafted the documentation. Internal ethics officers will arrive within the hour. Corporate has signed off." Chloe raised her hand, voice cracking with hope. "What's a verbal audit?" Isabella turned to her gently. "It means we don't just check numbers. We track words. What's said, what's omitted, and who's treated like a burden just for walking through the door." Marcus nodded. "That changes everything." Leo whispered, "That makes it human." Isabella smiled faintly. "That's the point." Just then, in the silence that followed, a sound broke through that no one expected. Derek Hayes, the fired security lead, clearing his throat. Everyone turned. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "I need to say something," he said, hands loose at his sides. "I didn't just fail to stop what happened. I helped plan it." The air shifted. Isabella's expression sharpened, but she didn't speak. Derek continued. "Brittany came to me 2 months ago. She said corporate was sniffing around for non-compliance and that Karen had a plan to bury the red flags. My job was to make sure anyone who complained got quietly removed from the space before it turned into paperwork." The room was dead quiet. She said, "The less we see, the less we write." So I followed it. I flagged certain clients as elevated risk based on how they looked, how they asked questions, whether they challenged fees. Chloe's face darkened. "That's profiling." Derek nodded. "It was. I knew it. I did it anyway." He looked at Isabella. "You gave me a job. I turned it into a shield for the wrong people." Isabella stepped forward slowly. "Did Stephen know?" "He knew enough to never ask questions," Derek said, "and he knew which clients to avoid." Anita's voice came in again, calm but firm. "Isabella, we've located 3 compliance reports that were altered after escalation. Derek's name is on all of them." Derek didn't argue. "I deserve to be held accountable, but I didn't come clean to save myself. I came clean because watching you stand in this room and say what you said, I realized I've never worked for someone I respected before." Isabella didn't soften. "You nearly got me arrested. You intimidated people who came here in good faith. And now you want grace." Derek shook his head. "I want consequence, and I'll take it. But I also want you to know there's more. Brittany wasn't acting alone. There's a list. A private tag in the CRM system used to mark problem clients. And that list, it's longer than you think." Anita replied instantly, "I'll pull it now. We'll freeze access and start a forensic review." Isabella turned to the room. This is why we reform. Not tomorrow. Not at a retreat. Right here in this space where silence let bias grow. Today, we root it out. Clients began to clap. Not because they were relieved, but because they were ready. Chloe stepped beside Isabella. Let us help. Isabella nodded. We'll do it together, starting with truth. And the room once poisoned by silence began to transform, with voices raised, with truths confessed, and with a culture finally cracked wide open for light to enter. Isabella stood tall as the last echoes of applause faded not in triumph, but in clarity. She scanned the private lounge, no longer just a waiting area, but now the front line of transformation. The fired employees had been escorted to a holding room. Clients lingered not out of curiosity, but solidarity. Summit compliance officers had arrived and were already reviewing flagged reports. One officer handed Isabella a short printed document. These are the provisional action items approved by the board, he said. She read it silently, then nodded. We begin here. Her voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of permanence. She turned to the room. Effective immediately, Summit Wealth will mandate verbal conduct audits at all high net worth branches. No more hiding bias behind silence. Every branch will follow our example, starting today in Miami. Anita's voice followed swiftly from the tablet speaker. Corporate has also terminated Chadwick Vance's accounts and initiated a formal review of his investment firm for internal bias violations. Isabella looked toward the now vacant seat where Chadwick had once stood sneering with false power. He had influence, she said quietly, but not character. Chloe Davis stepped closer, her voice strong. So what now? What happens after today? Isabella turned to her. We build something that doesn't just react to injustice, but prevents it. That's the legacy I want to leave. Leo, still stunned by everything that had unfolded, added, You did more than fire a team. You exposed a mindset. Isabella gave a faint, tired smile. Then we keep exposing it, until it can't grow in the dark anymore. Just as she turned back toward the compliance team, a voice rose from the back of the lounge, older, raspier, uncertain. There's one more thing. Heads turned. It was an elderly white man in a pressed gray suit, his Summit Wealth client badge clipped to his lapel. My name's Arthur Kensington, he said slowly. I retired from banking 10 years ago. I used to oversee training for this region. His voice shook. I trained Karen and Stephen and even Brittany when she was fresh. And I'll admit something I've never said publicly. We taught them to prioritize appearance, not openly, not with words like race or class, but with terms like client quality, suitability, and preferred posture. We never told them to reject women like you, but we gave them a system where rejection happened anyway. The room froze. Arthur stepped forward. I've watched today with shame. And I want to be on record saying this started long before Karen. I helped build the bias, and I want to help tear it down. Isabella walked toward him. Why now? She asked gently. He swallowed. Because watching you dismantle it with nothing but your voice made me realize I had mine the whole time and never used it. She paused. Then use it now. He turned toward the compliance officers. I'd like to give a full deposition and assist with training reform. One officer nodded and escorted him aside. The moment hung heavy but honest. Anita's voice came through again. Isabella, I finished the review of that client flag list Derek mentioned. 17 individuals marked as potential security risk had no prior incidents. 15 of them were Black or Hispanic. It's being submitted now for internal audit and external review. Isabella took a deep breath, eyes briefly closing. Then it's official. This wasn't a case. It was a culture. Chloe reached out and touched Isabella's shoulder. And you didn't just fight it. You broke it wide open. Naya, standing quietly with her phone pressed to her chest, added, I came here to start a business. And somehow you gave me a future too. Isabella turned to her and smiled. You still will. And this time you'll do it in a bank that actually sees you. She looked around one last time, at the walls that had once contained prejudice, at the faces that now carried understanding. And then she spoke to all of them, to the cameraless world, watching beyond that lounge. Let this be the last time silence walks away stronger than truth. Let this be the moment we remember that justice doesn't come from hashtags. It comes from who we choose to be when no one's filming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hand. I stood still and spoke clearly. If I can do that here, then so can you, wherever you are. And as she turned to lead the compliance officers into the branch's inner offices, Anita's final words echoed through the speaker. Summit Wealth will never be the same. And that's exactly the point. The door closed softly behind them. But the message, the lesson, and the legacy stayed right there in the lounge, where silence was finally broken for good. If you've ever been doubted, dismissed, or denied, let this story remind you. Your voice matters. Justice begins with truth. Subscribe, share, and stand with us, because the next story we tell might be yours.